A police officer was patrolling on Christmas Eve when he froze in shock. By the dumpster, a starving German Shepherd was digging through trash for food. But as the officer drew closer, his heart nearly stopped. It was Rex, the canine partner of his late wife who had died mysteriously in the line of duty 1 year ago. She was gone. No farewell, no clear answer. And yet, here was her loyal dog, scarred, trembling, but still carrying a secret she had left behind. What happened on that tragic night, and why had Rex returned now, leading him toward the truth she had died protecting? What happened next will break your heart and make you believe in loyalty and miracles again. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story travels. The wind howled softly through the frozen streets of Maple Hollow, Wyoming, carrying whispers of snow across cracked pavement and bare pine trees. It was just past 11 p.m. on Christmas Eve. Most houses were glowing gently behind frost-covered windows, filled with the flicker of candles and the soft murmur of old songs. But the outer edge of town was a different story. Silent, cold, still. A black and white patrol cruiser rolled slowly along Lantern Drive, tires crunching over thin ice, engine humming like a lullaby for the lonely. Inside sat Ethan Cole, 35, a patrol officer with the Maple Hollow Police Department. He was a tall man with a narrow frame and broad shoulders, dressed in a dark navy uniform that now fit looser than it had a year ago. His short brown hair was combed but tousled at the ends, and a permanent shadow of stubble clung to his jaw. But it was his eyes, steel gray, tired, hollow, that revealed the most. Ethan was once the kind of man who remembered every name on his beat, who offered gentle nods to elderly neighbors, who stopped his cruiser so kids could cross the street without looking up from their snowballs. But now, he was a ghost in uniform. His wife, Anna, had died almost exactly 1 year ago, killed in a night raid gone wrong. A fellow officer, his partner in every sense. The details of that night remained foggy and incomplete. Ethan had been away on a statewide training course in Cheyenne when he got the call. He'd made it back in time to bury her, but not in time to say goodbye. No body cam footage, no official suspects, just a line in the report that chilled him. K-9 unit unaccounted for. That dog, Rex, had been Anna's trusted partner, a sable-coated German Shepherd trained to protect, detect, and defend. He'd been her shadow until that night. After the failed raid, he'd vanished, presumed killed or lost in the surrounding forest. There were no sightings, no sign. Ethan gritted his teeth as he turned down the alley behind Langley's Market, a long-closed grocery store where homeless drifters sometimes camped. His gloved fingers tapped nervously on the steering wheel. This stretch of road had been Anna's favorite. She used to say the back of Langley's smelled like old donuts, and she'd occasionally bring home a bent box of pastries the manager gave her for free. Ethan hadn't touched a donut since. The alley came into view, narrow, flanked by rusted dumpsters and the back door of the market, long padlocked shut. He slowed. Then he saw it, a figure small, hunched rustling beside a torn trash bag. He narrowed his eyes, shifting the cruiser into park. At first, he thought it might be a raccoon or feral cat, but as the figure moved, it became clear. It was larger, more deliberate. The motions weren't skittish, they were calculated. Ethan stepped out of the car. His boots struck the frozen ground with a muffled crunch, the cold immediately nipping at his neck. The night was quiet, save for the distant sound of wind and his own slow breath. He moved carefully, hand near his holster not out of threat, but habit. His flashlight beam sliced through the dark, glinting off the torn lid of the dumpster. Then the figure turned, and Ethan froze. It was a dog, a German Shepherd, badly underweight, its ribs visible even through a shaggy, dirt-caked coat. Its fur was streaked with silver and brown, heavy with mud and melting snow. One ear stood alert, the other bent awkwardly to the side. A long scar ran down the back of its right hind leg, like an old wound that never healed. The dog's head was buried deep in a styrofoam takeout box, licking remnants of something greasy and cold. Its tail didn't wag. Its eyes were sharp but dull with exhaustion. And then, Ethan's breath caught. His stomach turned as recognition slammed into him like a sledgehammer. Rex? The name rose from his throat before he could stop it, half choked, half spoken. His vision blurred. "No way," he muttered. "Rex?" The dog's ears twitched. Slowly, cautiously, the shepherd lifted his head, muzzle smeared with bits of rice and sauce. Snow clung to his whiskers. His eyes met Ethan's brown, deep and filled with something almost human. Recognition, hesitation, pain. Ethan stumbled forward a step, heart hammering. His boots crunched louder this time. The dog took a step back. "Easy. It's okay, boy," Ethan whispered, crouching down, his arms loose at his sides, palms open. "You remember me?" The shepherd tilted his head slightly. Then, slowly, he limped forward, one paw dragging faintly behind the others. His movements were cautious but not afraid, broken but not defeated. Ethan dropped to his knees on the frozen pavement. "Rex," he breathed again, the name tasting like ash and memory. The dog reached him and pressed his cold, wet nose into Ethan's chest. Ethan couldn't speak. His gloved hands trembled as he cradled Rex's scarred head, feeling the matted fur beneath his fingers, the jagged edge of the dog's wounded ear. Tears welled in his eyes before he realized they had arrived. For a year, he had buried everything: grief, anger, regret. But now, kneeling in the snow with the living piece of his wife's final night pressed against him, all of it returned. "How the hell are you still alive?" he whispered. Rex whined softly, leaning harder into his chest. The same weight Anna used to talk about, how he would rest his head against her ribs after every shift like he was grounding her, keeping her steady. The snow began to fall heavier now. Fat flakes settled on Ethan's shoulders, melted into Rex's coat. The cold didn't matter. Nothing did. Except that he had found him. Or, rather, Rex had found him. And with him, perhaps, the first thread of truth about what really happened that night Anna died. The door to Ethan's small apartment creaked open as he guided Rex inside, the warm air from the old radiator brushing against their frostbitten skin and fur. The space was modest: one bedroom, one couch, a kitchenette, but it was clean, quiet, and for the first time in months it didn't feel quite so empty. Rex walked slowly, his paws tapping softly on the laminate floor as he sniffed the corners with the wariness of a soldier returning to unknown territory. Ethan moved quickly, grabbing a towel and gently drying the wet clumps of snow from Rex's coat. He hadn't said much since their reunion behind Langley's Market, mostly because he couldn't find the words. His heart was still racing, hands still shaking from the shock of seeing Rex alive. The last memory he had of the dog was from Anna's locker photo. Rex beside her patrol SUV, tail mid-wag, ears perked up as if listening for danger or praise. Now, he looked older, at least 10 years old, with streaks of silver across his muzzle, his right leg slightly dragging behind him. The scar on that same leg looked raw, a constant reminder of whatever had happened that night. As Ethan sat beside him on the rug, brushing through his matted fur with an old hand brush, he noticed something odd nestled against the thick layer of grime around Rex's neck. He paused, gently parting the fur to see clearer. There, tucked between the folds of an old black leather collar, was a small strip of laminated paper, about 2 inches wide, folded tightly and sealed with tape that had begun to peel. Frowning, Ethan peeled it open. A series of numbers and symbols stared back at him. M4, F89, 2W7, RC. He turned it over. Nothing else. Just a partial smudge of blue ink like it had once been stamped with a department seal. Ethan's brows furrowed. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "What the hell is this, Rex?" The dog looked up at him then, almost as if answering, not with words, but with the deep, knowing stare of someone who had seen things no one else had survived. Outside, the snow began to fall again. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds. Ethan had spent most of the night on the couch, drifting in and out of sleep, Rex curled at his feet. At 7:00 a.m., he was in uniform, pouring coffee into a thermos, glancing every few seconds at the scrap of paper sitting on the counter. He hadn't told anyone about Rex yet. Part of him didn't want to. Not until he understood why the dog was still alive, why he had disappeared. But in Maple Hollow, silence didn't last long. At the station, Deputy Kyle Hartman was already waiting. Mid-20s, clean-cut and ambitious, Kyle had only been on the force for 3 years but carried himself like a man eager to prove he belonged. His short blonde hair was always perfectly parted, and his posture too straight to be natural. As Ethan stepped inside the bullpen, Kyle glanced up from his desk. "You're late," he said with mock seriousness, raising an eyebrow. "Christmas miracle or just sleeping in?" Ethan didn't answer, walking past toward the evidence room. Kyle pushed his chair back and followed. "Hey, wait, are those paw prints on your pants? Did you pick up a stray last night?" Ethan paused, casting a sharp glance back. "Something like that." Kyle tilted his head. "You're not planning to keep it, are you? Might want to check for diseases before letting it in your apartment. Stray dogs around here usually mean trouble." Ethan said nothing, only gave a slight nod before entering the storage area and closing the door behind him. Later that morning, while reviewing reports, Ethan overheard Kyle at the coffee station talking with another officer, Lisa Granger, a kind-eyed woman in her 40s who had served with Anna in the past. "I think something's going on with Cole," Kyle whispered. "He's been acting strange. Last night I saw him near Langley's with some filthy dog. I know he's still grieving, but come on, picking through trash on Christmas Eve?" Lisa didn't respond immediately. Then she said, "Maybe grief makes people do strange things. Or maybe some dogs aren't just dogs." Ethan pretended not to hear. By lunchtime, he was back at his apartment. Rex had been resting on a folded blanket by the window, watching the street in silence. When Ethan entered, the dog perked up but didn't move. He looked calmer than last night, but there was still a tension in the way he held his head, like he was waiting for something to happen. Ethan sat at the table and opened his laptop. He typed the code from the caller into the department's restricted database using old logins from his time on Anna's narcotics task force. Nothing. Then he tried splitting the code. M4, F89, 2W7, RC. Each looked like unit or shipment codes. He added the term evidence logs. A match blinked on screen. The reference came from a seizure list dated 9 months ago, 3 months after Anna died. It was marked as classified narcotics inventory, linked to an interstate smuggling investigation that had since gone cold. The box containing that inventory had been marked for transport to the state evidence vault in Cheyenne, but, according to the records, it never arrived. No follow-up was logged, no report, no inquiry, and, in the comments section, a single note: initial seizure led by Officer A. Cole and K9 RX. Ethan stared at the screen. Anna had been onto something big, and Rex K9 RX had been there. The memory of Anna's last phone call came flooding back. She'd called him the night before the raid, her voice low, almost afraid. "If anything happens," she'd said, "promise me you'll find Rex." He hadn't understood at the time. Thought it was just precaution. Now, her voice echoed like a warning he had failed to hear. Rex stood now, walking slowly over to Ethan's side, laying his chin gently on the officer's knee. Ethan placed a hand on his head. "You knew," he whispered. "You saw it all." Outside the window, the town moved as usual. A delivery truck passed. A child rode a sled down a nearby hill, but inside, everything had changed. Rex hadn't just returned by chance. He was a messenger, a witness, maybe even a survivor of something no one had dared speak about. And now, Ethan had the first thread: a code, a scar, a dog who refused to die. The sun had begun to set behind the pine-covered ridges of Maple Hollow, casting long shadows over the snow-dusted rooftops. A light fog rolled in from the north, veiling the town in a misty quiet that made everything feel older, heavier. Ethan sat on the front steps of his apartment building, coffee mug cooling in his hands, Rex lying beside him, ears perked toward the distant tree line. The German Shepherd hadn't stopped watching the woods since morning. Something about his stillness unsettled Ethan. Rex had hardly touched his food that day. Instead, he had paced the apartment in slow, tense loops, occasionally pausing near the door as if listening for something beyond the walls. When Ethan tried to sit at his desk and organize what little he knew, namely the code in Rex's collar and the missing shipment from Anna's last case, Rex would nudge his thigh insistently, then bark softly before returning to stare out of the window. It was as if the dog was trying to say something he couldn't. Just before dusk, Rex stood up, tail low but alert, and trotted to the edge of the porch. He glanced back at Ethan, gave a short huff, then looked toward the forest that bordered the west side of town. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "You want to go there, don't you?" Rex responded with a short bark and a shift of his weight toward the trailhead that disappeared into the woods. Ethan set his coffee down and grabbed his jacket. The trail that ran from Maple Hollow into the forest was narrow and uneven, flanked by tall, swaying pines and overgrown brush. Snow crunched underfoot as Ethan followed Rex through the darkening path, flashlight cutting through fog like a blade. They hiked deeper than Ethan expected, nearly 20 minutes in, until the trees opened into a clearing Ethan hadn't visited in years. A forgotten service road now almost completely reclaimed by nature. To his left, behind a cluster of trees and nearly buried under branches, sat an old structure. It was a low, wooden building, part shed, part bunker, its frame warped with age and decay. Moss crawled up its planks, and rust streaked the hinges of its iron-reinforced door. A "No Trespassing" sign hung at an angle, faded and half buried in ivy. Rex stopped at the threshold and sniffed the ground intently. Then, with a soft growl, he pawed at the door. Ethan reached for the handle. It took his full weight to push it open. Inside, the air was stale and sharp with the scent of mildew, gun oil, and something sour something that didn't belong. The space was small, maybe 20 by 20 feet. Wooden crates were stacked against the walls, most sealed shut, some cracked open and empty. A broken table stood in the center, its legs splintered, surface covered in dust. A few rusted cans rolled near the back wall. But what caught Ethan's eye was the floor beneath the table. Scattered in the dirt were several brass shell casings, old, corroded, but unmistakable. Ethan crouched and picked one up. The markings on its base matched the ammunition listed in the missing evidence report tied to Anna's last operation. He turned his light to the wall behind the crates. Carved into the wood, barely visible beneath dust and time, were symbols. Ethan stepped closer. The second symbol looked like a triangle intersecting with a square almost identical to a stamp from the code in Rex's collar, RC. He took out his phone and snapped pictures. Rex sniffed one of the open crates. Inside, Ethan found shredded black fabric tactical gear, torn and abandoned. Next to it was an empty evidence bag stamped with the department seal. Someone had used this place to store or hide something, and then they'd either left in a hurry or tried to erase the trail. Ethan sat back on his heels, mind racing. If Anna had followed the same trail before she died, maybe she'd found this place too. Maybe someone had followed her out. Maybe she hadn't just died during a raid gone wrong. Maybe this bunker held the truth she never got the chance to speak. Rex whimpered quietly and nudged a nearby box. Ethan turned his flashlight toward it. Unlike the others, this one wasn't military green. It was a pale wooden crate, lighter, marked with a faded black logo, Gilwai Border Supply Kio. Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew the company. It was a small transport firm based in Cheyenne, long suspected to be a front for smuggling across the Wyoming-Montana border, but the department had never secured enough evidence for a full raid. Anna had always believed they were part of something bigger. Now, here was a crate from that exact company, hidden in the middle of nowhere, in a building no one had touched in at least a year. He stood slowly. "You led me here for a reason," he said quietly to Rex. Rex didn't respond, just sat, alert and watchful, like he had all the time in the world. The next morning, back in town, Ethan walked across the street to a small, single-story cottage with white trim and a sagging front porch. On the porch stood Geraldine Parker, a retired librarian in her mid-60s, bundled in a thick plaid coat and red scarf. Her gray hair was swept back in a bun, and her thin-rimmed glasses rested low on her nose. She had been Ethan's neighbor for years, and, since Anna's passing, the only person who still knocked on his door without apology. As Ethan approached, she gave him a look that was half stern, half maternal. "That dog," she said, nodding toward Rex, who sat obediently by Ethan's side, "wasn't meant to disappear forever. Some things come back for a reason, you know." Ethan paused at the bottom step. "You recognized him?" "I saw him walk beside Anna 100 times," she said. "Always looked more alert than any partner she ever had. If he's found his way back to you, maybe it's because you still have something left to find." Ethan didn't reply, but her words lingered long after he left. That evening, he sat with Rex by the window, going over the photos from the forest. The carvings, the evidence bag, the border supply crate. Everything pointed to a trail Anna had followed and died for, and now Rex had brought him to the same path. The dog was more than a survivor. He was the map. The next morning, Ethan sat at his desk in the precinct, the pale glow of his computer screen illuminating his tired face. The station was quiet, the holiday lull still lingering. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he stared at the login prompt to the department's archived case system, a secure database that required supervisor clearance to access anything marked as closed and sealed. His gut twisted as he typed in the case number tied to Anna's last operation. Case 42A-101, Cole A. K9, RX, Narcotics Task Force, status closed, access restricted, supervisor authorization required. He leaned back in his chair, jaw clenched. Whoever had sealed the file had made sure it would stay buried. His badge number alone wouldn't get him in. He would need someone higher up. But after Anna's death, the department had grown quiet around him, friendly on the surface, but guarded underneath. The camaraderie he once shared with his fellow officers had turned into polite nods and short replies. Ethan glanced toward the window. Snow had started to fall again, light but persistent. He closed the terminal, shut off the monitor, and rose from his desk. Rex had been waiting in the car, restless since they left the forest yesterday. Something about that place had stirred something in the dog. Since then, Rex had remained on edge, pacing, ears twitching at every sudden sound. As Ethan opened the passenger door, Rex immediately stood, tail low but eyes focused. He sniffed the air, then let out a soft growl, as if urging Ethan to move. Instead of heading home, Ethan drove toward the outer edge of Maple Hollow, to a winding road that cut through the forest and led toward a long-forgotten farmhouse. It was a wide, sloping property with overgrown hedges, warped fencing, and a cabin that looked like it had once been proud, now sagged under the weight of time. This was the home of Sheriff Harold Boyd, now retired. Boyd had served as Maple Hollow's sheriff for nearly 3 decades. A stocky man with silver hair and a barrel chest, he had been known for his booming voice and iron-firm handshake. To the public, he was a protector decorated for bravery, praised for cleaning up drug activity in the early 2000s, and beloved for remembering birthdays and personally helping townsfolk shovel snow in the winter. But Anna never trusted him. She had told Ethan once late at night over Chinese takeout that there were lines Boyd used to cross lines nobody was allowed to question. Ethan had dismissed it back then as speculation, but now, standing at the edge of the old sheriff's property, he felt the weight of those words. Rex jumped out of the cruiser the moment Ethan opened the door. The dog lowered his nose to the ground and began to sniff aggressively, circling along the edge of the property line. His body grew tense, his tail stiff, ears pinned forward. "Rex," Ethan said, but the dog didn't stop. He followed Rex to the west side of the cabin, where an old woodshed sat half-sunken into the earth. Rex froze, sniffed the air, and suddenly let out a deep, guttural bark louder than Ethan had ever heard him make. Then another, and another. "Easy," Ethan whispered sharply, moving quickly to calm him, but Rex kept barking, teeth slightly bared, eyes locked on the shed. The front door of the house creaked open. Out stepped Harold Boyd, wrapped in a long wool coat, boots caked with snow. He still moved with the confidence of a man who thought he owned every room he walked into. His face was weathered, lined deep from age and hard winters, but his eyes, pale and sharp, hadn't softened one bit. "Well, well," Boyd said, his voice gravelly but amused. "Never thought I'd see you out here, Cole." Ethan stood straighter, hands at his sides. "Was out for a walk. Rex got interested in something." Boyd looked down at the barking dog. His mouth twitched slightly, maybe a smile, maybe something else. "That's a face I haven't seen in a long time. Thought the department said he died." "So did I," Ethan replied. Boyd took a step forward, his boots crunching hard into the snow. "Strange, him turning up now, on your doorstep, no less." "I'm starting to think nothing about that night was what it seemed," Ethan said, voice even. Boyd's eyes darkened. "That a suggestion, officer?" Ethan didn't flinch. "Just an observation." The silence between them was sharp, like a drawn blade. Then Boyd gave a soft chuckle, wiped snow from his mustache with a gloved hand. "You know, there are some ghosts better left alone, son. Dig too deep and you might find yourself buried alongside them." Rex let out another bark, stepping closer to the shed. Boyd's eyes flicked that way. Just for a second. Ethan saw it. Before he could say anything more, a car pulled up behind his cruiser. Deputy Kyle Hartman stepped out, looking uneasy. His coat was half-zipped, and his badge glinted beneath a loose scarf. Kyle looked between Ethan, Rex, and Boyd. "Didn't know you were out here," he said carefully. "Just taking a look around," Ethan said, his tone flat. Kyle stepped closer, lowered his voice. "This isn't smart, man. You know who he is. Sheriff Boyd practically built this town's badge. You start poking around here, people will think you're losing it." Ethan didn't respond. Kyle's voice lowered further. "I've heard what you're doing, digging up Anna's old files, asking around about the border stash. You're not going to like what you find. Trust me." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Maybe it's not about liking it." Kyle hesitated, then stepped back. "Don't say I didn't warn you." Boyd was still standing by his porch, watching like a hawk. He gave a short nod. "You boys take care now." Ethan said nothing as Rex growled one last time and turned back toward the car. The dog's body was tense the whole way home, eyes never fully relaxed. Ethan knew what it meant. Rex had caught the scent of something, and that something was familiar from the night Anna died. The late afternoon sky had turned steel gray over Maple Hollow, casting long shadows across the frozen streets. The snow that had lightly dusted the town overnight had hardened into slick ice, and the air held that biting edge of a storm not far off. Ethan stood outside the federal building in Cheyenne, his breath misting in the cold as he checked the address one last time before heading in. The brick building looked unassuming, just another block in the grid of government offices, but inside was a man Ethan hadn't spoken to in nearly 2 years. Agent Dean Wallace, FBI field supervisor, early 50s, stood at the window of his office when Ethan entered. A tall black man with broad shoulders and a bald head that gleamed under the fluorescence, Dean's presence filled the room without him needing to speak. His face, marked by deep lines around the mouth and eyes, reflected years of fieldwork and late nights staring at impossible reports. He wore a gray wool blazer over a dark blue turtleneck, and his expression didn't shift as Ethan closed the door behind him. "It's been a while, Cole," Dean said finally, his voice calm, even. "I thought I'd only see you again if we buried another agent." Ethan stepped forward, unsure how much to say. "I'm not here officially. Not yet." Dean turned, eyes sharp. "You're here about Anna." Ethan nodded once. "And about Rex." At the mention of the dog's name, Dean's eyes flickered just briefly, but enough. "I heard the dog was dead," Dean said. "So did I," Ethan replied. "But he's not. He showed up 2 nights ago, and he brought something with him. Dean gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Tell me everything." As Ethan spoke about the alley behind Langley's, the scar on Rex's leg, the strange code hidden in the collar, the forest bunker, and finally the confrontation with Boyd, Dean's expression shifted from neutral concern to rigid focus. He didn't interrupt, didn't blink when Ethan mentioned the missing crate with the Wyoming Border Supply logo or the evidence bag marked with Anna's initials. When Ethan finished, Dean stood and walked to the filing cabinet against the far wall. From the bottom drawer, he retrieved a thick folder and opened it to a photo, an overhead satellite image showing a line of trucks crossing the state line, time-stamped just 3 days before Anna's final raid. Dean handed it to Ethan. "She came to me 3 months before her death," Dean said. "Said she'd been tracking unusual cargo movements between here and Montana. Unmarked shipments, military-style crates. Nothing logged officially. She was building a case quietly, too quietly." "She didn't trust the department," Ethan said quietly. "She didn't trust Boyd," Dean corrected. "Said he had ears in every office, and that if she filed through normal channels it'd be erased before sunrise." Ethan's hands tightened around the folder. "She died during that raid." Dean nodded slowly. "And Rex disappeared. Until now." Ethan glanced up. "You knew she was onto something. Why didn't you push?" Dean exhaled heavily, sat back down. "Because she didn't have proof, just theories. And when she died, the whole case folded like it never existed." Ethan looked away, jaw clenched. Dean leaned forward. "But if Rex survived, if he was with her that night and escaped, then he may have carried out exactly what she intended." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Dean reached for a drawer and pulled out a small, black device, a portable microchip scanner. High-grade K9s assigned to high-risk units like Anna's were sometimes equipped with internal encrypted storage, not for tracking, for storing mission logs, audio, geolocation, GPS trails. Ethan's eyes widened. "You're saying Rex might be carrying a record of that night?" Dean nodded. "If she activated it, and if the chip wasn't damaged—" "Yes." The room fell silent. Back in Maple Hollow later that night, Ethan returned to his apartment, Rex greeting him at the door with a soft tail wag. The warmth of the small living room was a stark contrast to the frigid road home. Geraldine's voice came from behind him before he even turned around. "You don't knock anymore," Ethan said without looking. Geraldine Parker, wrapped in a thick maroon shawl, stood in his doorway with a casserole dish in hand and that usual mix of annoyance and affection in her eyes. "I bring dinner, you bring answers. That's our deal, isn't it?" He allowed a small smile as she entered and set the dish down, but her eyes moved quickly to Rex. "He looks better. Still haunted, though." Ethan nodded. "We both are." She sat at the kitchen table and waited for him to do the same. Her tone shifted. "I meant to tell you something yesterday, but I wasn't sure it mattered. Now, maybe it does." Ethan sat across from her, listening. "I've volunteered at the elementary school library for years. You know that," she began. "But last spring, something strange started happening. A group of kids kept talking about a crate they found in the woods. Said it was big, wooden, and had military stencils on it." Ethan froze. "Boyd came to the school a few days after those stories started spreading," Geraldine continued. "Said it was dangerous for children to wander off trails, told the principal not to encourage rumors." "He shut them up," Ethan muttered. Geraldine nodded. "The stories stopped, but the crate, they described it exactly the way you just did. I don't think it was a coincidence." Rex walked over and rested his head on Ethan's knee. Ethan rubbed the dog's ears slowly. "Anna must have found one of those shipments near the school trail system. Maybe she followed it from there to the bunker. And if Boyd was watching her," Geraldine said carefully, "he might have known she was getting close." Ethan stood and paced to the window. Snow had started falling again, soft and slow. Across the street, porch lights flickered on like quiet sentinels. He turned back to Geraldine. "I need to know what Rex remembers," he said, "and I need Dean's help to get it." Geraldine's voice was quiet. "You're not just chasing a ghost anymore, Ethan. You're chasing a truth someone buried deep." Outside, Rex lifted his head toward the window, ears twitching, as if he, too, remembered something that had been hidden far too long. The storm hit Maple Hollow just after dawn. Thick snow fell in heavy sheets, blanketing the town in white and muffling every sound beneath a curtain of quiet. Ethan's truck rumbled along a back road barely visible beneath the accumulating powder, tires crunching through drifts. Rex sat in the passenger seat, eyes alert, nose twitching. The German shepherd hadn't taken his gaze off the forest since they left town. In the back seat sat Agent Dean Wallace, bundled in a black parka and jeans, his calm expression betrayed only by the way his hands tightened occasionally on his phone. Dean had agreed to come with Ethan without hesitation. He had brought a compact field kit flashlight, weapon, a backup radio, and, most importantly, the portable chip scanner, now tucked inside his coat. The plan was simple. Return to the forest bunker Ethan had found days ago, follow Rex's lead, and uncover what Anna might have been chasing before it cost her everything. They pulled up to the clearing just after 8:20 a.m. The sky was low and gray, thick with snow. The entrance to the bunker was almost invisible under the snowfall, but Rex jumped down from the truck and led the way without pause. His movements were no longer hesitant. He walked with purpose. The inside of the wooden shack was colder than Ethan remembered. Dean swept his flashlight over the crates and debris, scanning for signs of movement, anything disturbed since Ethan's last visit. Rex circled the far wall, then began to paw at a stack of crates near the corner. Dean stepped beside the dog and crouched low. He's tracking something. Ethan helped clear the crates, revealing what looked like a solid wooden floor, except for a faint outline, almost like a seam, running along the planks. Dean ran his hand across the edge, then tapped lightly. The hollow sound answered back. "A hatch," he said. Ethan pulled a pry bar from the toolkit in the truck. It took effort and leverage, but eventually the trapdoor gave way with a groan, revealing a short staircase descending into darkness. A gust of frozen air rose from below, thick with mildew, metal, and something acrid. They descended slowly, flashlights cutting through the shadows. The hidden room was no more than 15 feet wide, lined with metal shelves. On those shelves were black duffel bags, open crates, and steel cases. Inside were guns, AR-15s, Glocks, sniper rifles, many still wrapped in plastic. But it wasn't just weapons. There were maps, shipping manifests, names typed on yellowing paper, some of them circled in red ink. Dean opened a folder marked Distribution, MH South. Inside were photos of the buildings across town, including Langley's Market, the elementary school loading dock, and even an aerial shot of the sheriff's station itself. "Jesus," Dean muttered. "She was right. It was all right here." Ethan stared at a second folder, hands trembling slightly. He flipped it open and found a photo of Anna taken from a distance, blurry, but clear enough to see her face. The folder was labeled Surveillance Cole. "She was being followed," Ethan said. Rex stood still as stone, ears back, tail low. He emitted a soft growl that made both men look up. From above, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed. The door slammed shut. Ethan reached for his gun. Voices rose outside, the trapdoor muffled, but close. Then came the creak of floorboards and boots shifting above them. Dean whispered, "They're here." A shadow passed over the hatch. Then the door ripped open, revealing Sheriff Harold Boyd, standing over them in a long black coat. Snow clung to his shoulders. He held a rifle at his side. Behind him stood two men, both tall, both in heavy tactical gear, faces obscured by balaclavas. They flanked the opening, weapons ready. Boyd's voice was calm. "I warned you, Cole." Ethan stepped forward, gun lowered but eyes fixed. "What the hell is all this, Boyd?" Boyd looked around the hidden room with a trace of amusement. This is insurance, control. And once upon a time it was opportunity." "You killed her," Ethan said. Boyd didn't blink. "She was about to destroy everything. You think Anna was the first? She was just the one who got too close." Dean shifted beside Ethan. "This is federal jurisdiction now, Boyd. You're not walking away from this." Boyd smiled faintly. You think I care about federal anything? You're already dead, Wallace. You just haven't felt it yet. He raised the rifle. And that's when Rex moved. The German Shepherd let out a feral growl and lunged up the stairs, knocking one of the masked men sideways. The man's gun went off in a wild arc, slamming into the ceiling as he hit the wall. Boyd stumbled back, raising his weapon to shoot, but Rex was already leaping again, straight for Boyd's arm. The rifle went off. The shot missed Ethan by inches. Ethan dove, slamming into the second man as Dean grabbed the first attacker's weapon. A struggle broke out. Snow, shouting, fists and boots scrambling against frozen ground. Boyd yelled. Rex's jaws locked onto his forearm, pulling him down. Blood soaked his coat as the rifle fell from his grip. The fight was quick but brutal. Dean fired a warning shot into the air. "Everyone down!" he barked. The two masked men froze. One raised his hands. The other groaned on the ground, blood seeping into the snow. Boyd lay beneath Rex, his face twisted in shock and pain. Rex stood over him, chest heaving, tail rigid, ears alert. Dean snapped a pair of cuffs onto Boyd's good wrist. "You're under federal arrest." Ethan knelt beside Rex, hands shaking. "You okay?" Rex looked up at him, panting hard, eyes wild but alive. "You saved my life," Ethan whispered. And somehow, in that moment, he could almost hear Anna's voice. The courtroom in Maple Hollow had never seen so many people. A modest, century-old building with fading green shutters and creaky pinewood floors, it stood as both a symbol of justice and small-town pride. But on this particular morning, it had become something else entirely, a reckoning. Ethan stood near the front, his uniform pressed, his jaw clenched. Beside him sat Agent Dean Wallace, composed in his navy blazer, a thick file resting on his lap. And lying at Ethan's feet, as still and alert as ever, was Rex, the 10-year-old German Shepherd whose scarred leg and bent ear now seemed more like medals of survival than signs of age. Across the room, seated at the defendant's table, was Harold Boyd, the disgraced sheriff of Maple Hollow. Stripped of his badge, his once proud bearing had given way to a rigid, coiled posture. His eyes darted occasionally around the room, watching, calculating, but when they landed on Rex, his lip curled in disgust. The prosecution team had called in District Attorney Carla Vance, a tall black woman in her late 40s, sharp-featured and confident, known across the state for taking down organized crime rings. Her voice commanded attention, her every word chosen with precision. "The people of this town trusted Harold Boyd," she said, stepping toward the jury. "But instead of upholding the law, he twisted it. He turned Pine Valley Forest into a trafficking hub, using his badge to silence those who got too close." She turned and gestured toward Rex, including this dog's handler officer, Anna Cole. Gasps rippled across the courtroom. In the gallery, Geraldine Parker, the elderly widow who once doubted Ethan, now sat with a handkerchief crumpled in her lap. Her thin frame trembled as she leaned on her cane, her wrinkled eyes brimming with tears. "I remember," she whispered to the woman beside her. "Anna told me once, 'If anything ever happens to me, Rex will know what to do.'" And I laughed. I didn't believe her. I thought it was just a young woman being sentimental about her dog. She lowered her head, unable to watch as images were projected onto the courtroom screen photographs recovered from the bunker. Maps, smuggling routes, names, and finally, the damning surveillance shots of Anna being followed. Rex stirred slightly as his own footage came on screen body cam clips from the day of the raid, along with GPS data recovered from the chip embedded beneath his fur. Dean had confirmed the chip had been covertly installed by Anna. It wasn't just for tracking Rex-held encrypted files that she had personally transferred. These files, Dean testified, holding up a flash drive, were recovered from the chip embedded in Rex's shoulder. They include voice memos, visual logs, and annotated images. Anna Cole entrusted this information to her canine partner. It was her failsafe. The judge, Eleanor Hadley, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with short silver hair and stern glasses, leaned forward. "Let me be clear, Agent Wallace. This dog is not a legal witness. Are you suggesting this evidence is admissible solely because it was carried by the canine? Dean nodded calmly. Correct, Your Honor. Under federal chain of custody statutes, the data was untouched, unmodified, and verifiably sourced from Officer Cole herself. Rex was the delivery mechanism. Judge Hadley nodded, lips tight. Then proceed. The courtroom fell into a hushed silence as the audio files began to play. Anna's voice, clear, determined, filled the air. If this reaches you, it means I've failed to stop them. Boyd is in deeper than I thought. He's got men stationed at the school, at the freight station. He's moved the last of the guns. I don't know if I'll make it out of this, but I trust Rex. He'll find someone who'll listen. Ethan's hands balled into fists. Boyd looked away, his jaw tightening. The gallery broke into murmurs. Even those who once dismissed Ethan's suspicions now stared with wide eyes and open mouths. Parents exchanged worried looks. Teachers, shopkeepers, neighbors. They all felt the weight of betrayal crushing down. In a quiet corner, Deputy Kyle Morgan, a lanky man in his early 30s with prematurely thinning blonde hair and tired green eyes, stood with his back against the wall. He had worked under Boyd for years, loyal out of fear and habit more than belief. But now, as he watched Ethan and Rex, something shifted behind his eyes. Shame, perhaps. Or resolve. As the final audio log played, the words hung in the air like the strike of a bell. I love this town, Anna said. But someone has to choose truth over fear. If it's not me, maybe Rex can show them. The jury deliberated less than 2 hours. Boyd was found guilty on all charges: conspiracy, obstruction, second-degree manslaughter, and abuse of office. The sentence would be handed down later, but for now, justice had been served. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded the steps. The town square buzzed with murmurs, outrage, and sorrow. Yet amid it all stood Ethan and Rex. Looks like she never doubted you, Dean said quietly, nodding to the dog. Ethan gave a small smile, resting a hand on Rex's to his head. She always said he wasn't just a dog. He was her partner. In the crowd, Geraldine approached, leaning heavily on her cane. Her lips quivered as she looked up at Ethan. I was wrong about you, son, she said, and I was wrong about him too. She knelt, wincing, and gently touched Rex's fur. Thank you for bringing her truth back. Rex leaned into her hand, still and solemn. That night, a candlelit vigil formed at the edge of town. People brought flowers, photos, and small notes. At the center stood a framed portrait of Anna Cole in uniform, Rex seated beside it like a statue carved from loyalty and pain. A sign beneath the portrait read, She gave us the truth. He carried it home. The cabin Ethan chose wasn't much at first glance. Nestled at the edge of Pine Valley, it was a modest 2-bedroom structure with weathered siding and a porch that creaked beneath his boots. Yet, something about its stillness spoke to him like a place where grief might echo less and peace could settle quietly, one breath at a time. Morning sun filtered through the pines as Ethan opened the door, letting Rex wander in ahead. The dog's gait was slower than usual, his hind leg bearing the faint limp he always carried. But his ears were perked, and his eyes scanned every corner like a soldier returning from battle. Ethan followed behind, carrying a single box marked Anna. He placed it carefully on a small wooden shelf near the hearth, where he had already hung a framed photo, Anna in uniform kneeling beside a younger Rex. Her smile, open, fierce, and impossibly alive, lit up the room more than the sun spilling through the window. I kept my promise, Ethan whispered. You're home, Rex. The German shepherd padded to the frame and sat. For a long while, he stared at the image, head tilted ever so slightly, ears half lowered, not in sadness, but in recognition. Then he leaned forward and touched his nose to the frame. Outside, the breeze rustled the firs like a whispered lullaby. Later that day, the old pickup truck with the county emblem pulled up the dirt drive. Deputy Kyle Morgan stepped out, holding a large roll of paper under one arm. He looked different than before, less weary, more upright, as if a weight had finally slid from his shoulders. Kyle was in his early 30s, lanky with broad shoulders and sandy blonde hair that refused to stay combed. There was a nervous energy about him, the kind that came from a man used to being underestimated but finally ready to stand tall. "Hope I'm not intruding," he said, walking toward the porch where Ethan sat whittling a piece of driftwood. Rex rested beside him, tail thumping lightly. "Not at all," Ethan replied. "Come on up." Kyle climbed the steps and unrolled the paper. It was a large drawing, clumsily colored but heartfelt. In the center was Rex, drawn larger than life, standing heroically in front of a burning courthouse. Kids had drawn medals around his neck, stars in his eyes, and even a red cape fluttering from his back. "The 5th grade class at Maple Hollow Elementary," Kyle explained, chuckling. "They heard everything. One girl said Rex was like Superman, but furrier and smarter. They wanted him to have this." Ethan stood to take it, lips tightening as he scanned the page. A lump rose in his throat. "She's right," he said. "He's more than a hero." Just then, a familiar voice called from the edge of the woods. "Are you boys just going to stand there or invite an old lady in?" Geraldine Parker emerged from the trees, wearing her usual floral print blouse and dark brown slacks, a wicker pie basket hanging from one arm. Her gray hair was pulled into a tidy bun, and she walked with a cane in one hand, Grace in the other. Her eyes, usually guarded, now held warmth. Ethan chuckled. "You found us." She huffed. "Please, I've been delivering pies around this valley since 1962. You think a little forest's going to stop me?" She walked up the porch and handed him the basket. "Peach and rhubarb, my best." Rex gave a soft bark, as if in approval. Geraldine turned to the dog. "You, mister, are the reason we still have a town to believe in." She bent down slowly, with the ache of age, and touched Rex's head. He leaned into her hand gently, eyes soft, tail wagging. Then she looked up at Ethan. "Anna would be proud. You gave that boy a home." She gestured to the cabin, then to Rex. "And you gave her story an ending it deserved." Ethan swallowed hard. "I still think about what I missed. If I had just been there—" She interrupted with a firm shake of her head. "No, don't. You did what mattered. You stood by her memory. You stood by him, and now—" She glanced around the porch, at the trees, at the photo in the window. "You have a family again." A quiet settled over them. Not uncomfortable, not empty, just peaceful. That evening, Ethan lit a fire in the hearth. The smell of smoke mingled with cinnamon and rhubarb as the pie cooled on the counter. He placed the drawing from the children on the wall above the fireplace, beside Anna's photo. On the opposite wall, he hung Rex's old collar, the one Anna used during training days, polished and worn. Rex lay curled at the hearth, warmth soaking into his aging bones. His ears twitched now and then, reacting to the cracking fire, the sigh of pine branches outside. Ethan sat nearby, a steaming mug of coffee in hand. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Because in that cabin, in the hush between memories and healing, there was no need for words. There was only the flicker of flame, the slow exhale of forgiveness, and the steady heartbeat of something new. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come with thunder or lightning, but in the quiet return of a loyal dog, in the embrace of an old friend, in the flicker of hope after long darkness. Rex didn't just lead Ethan to the truth, he led him back to faith, to love, to family. This story reminds us that even in the ruins of loss, God is still writing a new chapter. What feels like the end may be the very place where healing begins. When we least expect it, a door opens, a heart softens, and grace walks in sometimes on 4 legs. So, if you believe that God still works through the broken, the forgotten, the brave, and the loyal, drop an amen in the comments. Let's fill this space with faith. May the Lord bless you and your loved ones with protection, comfort, and second chances. Don't forget to like, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe for more real-life stories that will move your heart. Tell us in the comments. Has there ever been a moment in your life that felt like a miracle? We'd love to hear it. May God bless you always. Amen.